Hi there. This is a catch-up video going over the third of the Vanity Fair articles discussing the Amazon Lord of the Rings prequel series, where they had exclusive access with the producers and everything behind the scenes. There were three of these. The first one was the Thursday before the Super Bowl, on Super Bowl Sunday, and this was the first time we'd heard any real details of substance. The second article appeared the night of the Super Bowl, about an hour after the teaser trailer. And I made preceding videos about each one, and I said, this made a lot more sense than the teaser trailer, that the teaser trailer was incomprehensible without this article. I was ready to give up on this show entirely, officially, after the teaser itself, but then when I saw the explanation, oh, that's actually relatively close to what the story of the books is, in outline for this prequel era, that a few days later there was a third and final one, which was a straightforward interview with the new showrunners, McKay and Payne. Now, the first two they have access to, you can tell they're quoting things Amazon told them, and I think they misquoted or misunderstood one or two things, like they said Galadriel's commander of the Northern Armies, and everyone freaked out that she's not commander of all of the Northern Elves. And I think they meant of the northern border guards of Lindon. Makes a lot more sense. I think we just misquoted that. So it's a lot nicer to have a straight-up interview where they're just a transcript of a direct interview with the showrunners, because sometimes when they're trying to summarize their words, something gets lost in the transmission. This was 2 weeks ago. I've said it in other videos. My cat got gravely ill with, it turns out, a congenital heart condition. He's stabilized now, but I've been freaking out because of that, and that ate up a lot of my time the past 2 weeks. So I'm already 2 weeks late, and people aren't discussing this as much as they were right after the Super Bowl when this came out. So I realized I'm just going to dash something off, audio only, unedited, because it doesn't have nearly as much attention. This teaser didn't generate that much discussion beyond the first week. There was a lot of discussion the first week, but there was such little detail from it that unless you're a really hardcore Tolkien channel, I realized, given how little information we actually have, it doesn't make sense to make something very long. That the interview they gave, in the straight-up interview in the third of the three Vanity Fair articles, I want to make this short so you go to the link below and actually read the whole thing. That there's a lot of interesting stuff, even things which I wouldn't point out specifically, but which are, oh, that's something you're doing. There were 7 major takeaways I had from this interview they gave. And any one of these points could sustain a 10 to 15 minute or longer video discussing it at length. And I realized these topics will come up again in more detail and with more context when the next promo comes out, when the next full trailer comes out. So due to a combination of, we'll have more informational context then, and more of you guys in the audience will be checking for analysis, it makes more sense to hold off on a big, heavily edited with slides, detailed analysis. I'm going to pick up with that the next time we get a full trailer or something, or another major interview, because these topics aren't going away. That they'll come up against. This is the short, I'm rattling it off in maybe 10 minutes. These were my 7 main takeaways from that interview. You should go and read it, and I'll be discussing these more in future videos. I'm very far behind schedule because of this medical stuff. I have to catch up on so many other things, even like 2020 looking ahead to the New Year videos I meant to get to at New Year's Eve. I'm trying to wrap up. So I don't have the time to finish this. We need more information anyway, and a lot of people, the time frame has passed because I had some family medical thing. I might as well catch up when the next full trailer comes out and there's more buzz about this and more people would watch. So I realize this is a 7-point heads up. Go read the article, but these were my main takeaways from it. And one thing I want to stress before I start, though, which a lot of people are saying, is based on the first interview, the first Vanity Fair article, I actually was not encouraged by this because they hired two relatively unknown showrunners. They are script writers. They've been script doctors for over a decade. This isn't like Benioff and Weiss in Game of Thrones, where they didn't know how screenwriting works. They do know how screenwriting works, but they're relative unknowns. And they have no production experience, though thankfully they said they did hire up some other people to do that and delegate it. They said that on Game of Thrones. The reality was they micromanaged everything. They micromanaged all the directors and said, I know more than you, even though they had never done this before at all. That it's a big, expensive production. We hope they have people handling logistics. But the race stuff, just quickly, I've already said, we knew about that since last October, and I thought their explanation was simple enough. Oh, this is like the ancient past, thousands of years ago. It's not even in the Shire. It doesn't exist yet. This is like, and I told in my previous video, Tolkien's works go back to like the Garden of Eden and Tower of Babel, essentially. That this is 3,000, 4,000 years ago. And they're saying, oh, like in the East, when the hobbits are migrating around, there's like more than one tribe of proto-hobbits. And some of the tribes look white, some look black, some look like native New Zealanders. They're a mix of tribes. But as opposed to just, oh, let's make it gender blind, that doesn't make sense to me, versus, well, there's more than one tribe of them. Same thing for me. I said the race thing isn't a problem. I'm worried they'll use it as a shield to deflect from criticisms of writing or if they get the characterization wrong. But admittedly, we have nothing to fear yet, so I'm trying to be the better man and go, okay, I'm yet to hear a deal breaker. That, like I've said this, like there's 7 clans of dwarves, and we only ever really see 3 of them on screen, mostly Durin's folk, the Longbeards. There's 4 other ones that we never encountered before, and like maybe one of the other clans lives in the mountains of Harad in the south, and maybe they look black. Why wouldn't they? There's black humans in this world. Why? Hobbits are humans. They're not a separate race. They're a subtype of humans. Why wouldn't they look different? So, like, saying, oh, Galadriel's family randomly has black people in it would contradict the source, versus other tribes of elves in other parts of Middle-earth might look black or Asian or whatever. That's fine, because if it's a world-spanning thing, logically people in different parts of the world look different. They might be heavy-handed with it, I don't know, but in general principle, I would have done that. I'm worried they're going to use that to deflect from story criticisms, or dialogue criticisms, which admittedly we don't have yet because we don't have any dialogue or stuff. I'm crossing that bridge when I get to it. So the big point I want to emphasize, this kept coming up in the previous comment sections, is when people say, oh, you're defending them, I was actually really against this after that first Vanity Fair article. And I felt a lot better, and after reading the second one, I felt bad, saw the teaser, was ready to completely give up on it, then saw their explanation of the teaser and went, okay, this is sort of like a decent video game plot. And that's what I'm looking for out of this. Don't go into this thinking it'll be as good as Lord of the Rings. We will be lucky if it's as good as the Hobbit movies. And I generally more or less enjoy the Hobbit movies. I mean, there's some flaws in there, but even the third one has pure Tolkien moments in it, the parts that they're actually doing the books. So I'm looking at this detached, not trying to hate on it, but I'm not eager for it the way the Lord of the Rings fan crowd at OneRing.net is. I support them a lot. It's just, guys, it's going to be like a good video game at best. And I like a lot of video games, like Battle for Middle-earth 2 is a classic. Just, it's not going to be the trilogy from 2001. But, okay, I judge it one day at a time based on what I hear. So the way I sum it up is, I'm trying to be an objective and detached court-appointed defense attorney. So if you hear me building them up and going, well, okay, that's sort of like the books, I want to be able to say we're not toxic fans. That it's like I'm a court-appointed defense attorney who gave the criminal the best defense theoretically possible. If it's some crazy axe murder, and I try to argue, well, they might be insane, we don't really have photographic evidence, even if I don't believe it myself, I will state it just as a theoretical argument so it can be disproven. So when you give the criminal their sentence, you can say it was a fair trial. You can say, we gave you the benefit of the doubt, we were the better men, we gave you every option, we proposed every possible defense. So when they do screw up, they can't say you're a bunch of toxic fans who never gave us a chance. Like what they did that with the Star Wars sequel trilogy, which actually, I think the strength of the actors managed to carry much of it, but even then there were severe flaws. And they go, oh, you're just a bunch of toxic fans who don't like a black stormtrooper. And it's like, that isn't what we're complaining about. We're complaining about some writing problems. So I'm the secretary for the defense. I'm the court-appointed defense attorney. And so far, at least, there's been no major problems, if only because they haven't told us that much. There are 7 major points I got from this third interview. Go and read it. I understand I'm behind schedule, and I'll be covering these again when we get a new trailer. First, they explained very clearly, the new showrunners, that they do not physically have certain legal rights to source material. They have the rights to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. They don't have the rights to the Silmarillion. And this creates all sorts of problems that are physically beyond their control. I completely sympathize. They can't do anything about that. If I was in their position, I couldn't do anything about that. Lord of the Rings is about the story of the end of the Third Age, and by extension, the appendices talk about the Third Age a lot, which lasts like 3,000 years. Silmarillion is about the First Age of the history of Middle-earth. The Second Age isn't actually covered by one specific thing. There's stuff in the appendices of Lord of the Rings which covers it, and during the story of Lord of the Rings itself, they say there was Sauron rose, made the rings, Numenor came to stop him with the elves, then Numenor turned evil, but the survivors of Numenor who were still good fled to Middle-earth, created Gondor and Arnor, and made a last alliance with the elves to fight him. So there's details in there that you can pull, and particularly from the appendices. But don't walk into this expecting that they're going to give a long explanation of what happened in the First Age. They can't refer to many specific things from the Silmarillion. Like, they're not going to say that, yes, when Gondolin fell, I remember Ecthelion killed that Balrog, or at the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, the Sons of Fëanor did this, because they don't mention that in The Lord of the Rings, even in the appendices. Then again, this is a show about the Second Age. You wouldn't want them to just give big info dumps of a whole age that passed in countries that don't exist anymore, because they've been destroyed physically. They fell into the sea in a cataclysm. So they'll refer to some things in broad terms, but it's a constant legal battle with the Tolkien estate that we don't have the rights to certain things. In broad strokes, they can say Morgoth was the first Dark Lord, Sauron was his lieutenant, and after Morgoth was defeated, Sauron rallied all the evil guys and made Mordor. Even the Lord of the Rings Extended Edition, Fellowship of the Ring Extended Edition, Aragorn mentions and explains Beren and Luthien fought Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. So, because they mention it in the text of the Lord of the Rings. Just as well, this is part of our history looking backwards. But I understand they don't have certain legal rights, and I don't blame them for that. It's not that they're not attentive. What matters to fans is if they're attentive. Like, if they don't use a certain term on screen, but then in an interview they say, I have read that and I'm referring to that obliquely, indirectly, because I legally can't call it that. But they know all the backstory stuff. They said we've looked through the histories of Middle-earth stuff for context on Galadriel. It's just we don't have the rights to them, so we can't quote them directly. I sympathize with that completely. A big example of this affected even Peter Jackson. Remember in the first Hobbit movie, when Bilbo asks, oh, there's other wizards besides you, and he said, well, there's 5 of us. There's me, Saruman, Radagast the Brown, and the 2 blue wizards. You know, I don't remember their names. That's because they legally do not have the rights to their names, Alatar and Palando, that they were dancing around. That was his wink to the audience that we know they're the Blue Wizards. We can't legally call them. We don't own the rights to their names because they're from the other source book. So it'll be like that many times over, where they'll refer to, there's Blue Wizards. The 2 Blue Wizards, they went to the east, very broadly. but there's certain, like, proper names, proper nouns are a big thing, that I legally can't call it that. So they'll refer to that Galadriel's brother Finrod died in the war, but they don't have specific legal rights to show an extended flashback of specifically how he died, and they might have to change the details a little to make it very broad. And while I'm annoyed at this, it's due to the legal rights. They can't legally call it that. If they're smart, they'll just broadly say, well, he died in the war, which is true. That affects a couple of things. Another big part of it is, if you watched my preceding videos, I kept saying, why not just say that there's 7 clans of dwarves? We never saw 4 of the other ones, one of which is called the Blacklocks. Maybe the Blacklocks look like African black people and they're from the south. So I said, when you're introducing Deza, the one who's with Durin's folk, and Moria, she's the black dwarf woman who's the wife of Prince Durin IV, just give her a throwaway line saying, Elrond going, oh, you're not one of the Longbeards of Durin's folk. Just have her go, oh yeah, I married in. I'm a princess from the Blacklocks clan from the south. That would be fine for me. That would show that they're paying attention to the lore. Turns out they legally do not have the rights to the name Blacklocks, because that's in one of the Histories of Middle-earth books, is the only time Tolkien ever gave the names of the other 7 clans. He does say Durin's folk are properly called the Longbeard clan in the Lord of the Rings appendices, and even in The Hobbit they mention it by name. So they'd have to dance around that. They can't say the word Blacklocks, but I think they could still have Elrond go, when he meets her, go, you're not from the Longbeards clan of Moria, and just have her go, oh, I'm from one of the southern clans, from Harad, the mountains of Harad. That would be fine for me. And then hopefully in a post-episode interview, the showrunners will go, we don't own the rights to the name Blacklocks, but think of it that way. I'd be fine with it. You see what I mean? That they don't have certain legal rights, and I don't hold that against them, and they will have to work around that. Then again, this is a story of the Second Age, not of the First Age in the Silmarillion. Like, there's an appendix to the Silmarillion giving a little more detail about Numenor, the downfall of Numenor, but it's kind of retreading some of the information that was in the Lord of the Rings appendices anyway. And I think they're pulling info from it anyway, and just with a wink and a grin. But you can do this, because it's mostly looking forward, and there isn't that much detail in the Silmarillion on it anyway. And there's only so much info from the Histories of Middle-earth series they could really plug in on screen that would be relevant anyway. So I'm fine with that, the legal stuff. Rattling off the other stuff, that's the most important, that's why I gave so much time to it. Point 2 of 7, they rattled off their year-by-year plan. Broadly, they said, broadly there's 4 or 5 story points, depending on how you count them, and this show is supposed to run 5 seasons. And they list it as, first, the forging of the rings, that Anatar, really Sauron, tricks the elves into making the rings. Then, movement 2 is the rise of Sauron, his first war against the elves, against Celebrimbor, the fall of Eregion. Then his advance gets halted, he nearly wins. The Númenóreans come with an expeditionary force to stop him. So that ends that arc. So the second arc is the rise of Sauron. And they listed off 4, but the next one is a 2-parter. I think that's how they got to 5. The next thing is the rise and fall of Numenor. That you'll see Numenor colonizing the coasts and establishing this coastal empire, and then they start cutting down all the trees. I hope they work the Ents into that. And slowly they start going from, well, we're an expeditionary force, to we are ruthless colonizers. They enslave the coasts. They enslave Harad. They enslave Minhiriath and the coasts of Eregion. The coasts of Eriador. And at Londare and all the other ports. And gradually Numenor turns imperious and evil. And then Sauron seduces their king Ar-Pharazôn with promises of eternal life if he worships Morgoth, worships the literal devil, and conducts human sacrifice. But the handful of good Númenóreans, led by Elendil, the faithful, who stay true to God and don't worship the devil, they flee to Gondor just as Numenor gets destroyed. It's the Atlantis of Middle-earth. And they found these kingdoms in exile, Gondor in the south, Arnor in the north. And then you would see Gondor being built up, and they said the final arc is the War of the Last Alliance. So, Forging of Rings, Rise of Sauron, Rise and Fall of Numenor, War of the Last Alliance, yeah, that's accurate. These are the major story beats, the major story arcs on a 4 to 5 year scale. I get that, that's fine. On paper, at least, that's a good outline. Some of these other points are getting more trivial, so I'm just going to burn through them. Point 3, they clarified, it's nice that they clarified this. They said they're dropping a small element from the dwarves in the books, that the lead dwarf character is Durin the Fourth. He starts out as a prince. He will later become king, because the books do mention the name of the ruler of Moria, of Khazad-dûm at the time of the Last Alliance was Durin the Fourth. This is starting earlier than that, so he's still a prince. He'll eventually become king. The thing is, they confirm that his father is named Durin the Third. It doesn't work like that. His father was someone else in the books. More importantly, dwarves believe in reincarnation, or that sometimes people can be reincarnated, not all the time. I've heard this is a Jewish concept, that not all the time, but sometimes someone is such an important soul that their work on the earth isn't done yet, that occasionally someone will be reborn. I don't know if every denomination believes that, but the dwarves believe that sometimes if someone's really important, they will come back. And, you know, like, even, like, I don't know if that's I don't think Christianity officially believes that, but, you know, like, I have family members who said, I'm convinced my child is my grandparent, come again. Yeah, that kind of thing. But the dwarves really believe this, that Durin the First was the legendary forefather of the Longbeard clan of Khazad-dûm, the greatest dwarf king ever, and they think that Durin occasionally gets reincarnated. So Durin the Fourth isn't just his namesake. They think he's the fourth coming of Durin, his third reincarnation. So you can't have Durin the Fourth be the son of Durin the Third. He's a reincarnation. And basically, they politely explained ahead of time in this interview, and okay, if you're, like when Peter Jackson cut The Scouring of the Shire, I was annoyed, but at least he told us long in advance, which is polite. Don't spring it on us as a surprise. Stand by your choice. Have the courage to tell us in advance. And this is a minor point. They just said, we thought that was too confusing, so we cut it out. That the whole he's a reincarnation belief, we don't know if that's literally true in the story. They believe he's a reincarnation. They cut that, and I think the reason they did that is because people who didn't read the books but saw the Hobbit trilogy would kind of understand that Durin is the legendary founder of the dwarves. And they'd be confused by everyone calling this guy Durin. So my running theory is to make it obvious that it's a dynastic name. They had his father also named Durin, and they'll explain to Elrond when they're introducing him, oh, I'm Durin the Fourth, that's my father Durin the Third. You know, it's a dynastic name. It repeats. Just to make it really obvious, you need to... I'm thinking, why not just point to a painting or something? To have him go, oh, that's my great-grandfather Durin the Third, who allegedly I'm the reincarnation of, I like to think. They didn't... They could have done that, but I think they think viewers wouldn't pick up on that. You need to have two talking characters in the same scene to emphasize, no, he's Durin the Fourth, that's Durin the Third. For his father, this is news, by the way, they cast the actor who played the head of the Delos Corporation in HBO's Westworld series. Old Man Delos, the Man in Black's father-in-law, and they gave a cryptic message that we've cast a famous bad dad to play Durin the Fourth's father, Durin the Third. That's what they meant. I like that actor. It's good to have him. He'll be the king at the start of the show, then Durin the Fourth will take over later. And before I move on, one thing I want to admonish here, guys, when I was talking about the dwarves in my preceding video, cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks in the comments section. Don't go looking for them. They're not there, because I deleted all of them. Yes, there are parallels. Yes, Tolkien himself said that the dwarves are inspired by medieval Jews and they're sort of analogous to Jews. He did it the right way. He did it respectfully. I think it's actually pretty good in terms of world building. Let's not get into the childish, all this foolishness. I'm going to delete it anyway, so don't even get started. Geez, I'm almost 30 minutes in this. Well, like I said, the first points were the big ones, the story arc and all that. Some of the other stuff is kind of trivial. That was point 3, the dwarves. And I don't mind, that's not a game breaker. None of these are game breakers for me. Point 4 out of 7 is they pretty much acknowledged that all of the proto-hobbits are called Harfoots. Which is weird because, as I just said, they legally don't have the right to the name Blacklocks. They can't say, I'm from a different clan of one of the 7 clans of dwarves. I'm from one of the other ones, the Blacklocks. Because Blacklocks is a name from one of the books they don't have the rights to. The weird thing is, they have the rights to all 3 names of the different proto-hobbit tribes that, I said in the other video, well, the books do say in the prologue, well, there were 3 tribes of proto-hobbits, the Harfoots, the Fallowhides, and the Stoors. If they're calling them Harfoots, why aren't they doing with the other names? I'm not sure why they're not doing that. My suspicion is they thought it would be too confusing, that they want to draw a distinction between ancient hobbits and modern hobbits. So they said, well, these aren't hobbits, they're Harfoots. All of them. And discussing this in the OneRing.net forums, I think it's functionally going to be the same thing. It's just a matter of nomenclature. That in all likelihood, well, I said Harfoots are hill country hobbits, and Fallowhides are forest hobbits, they're huntsmen, and Stoors are river hobbits. I think they're not going to use those names just because too many names is confusing, but they will still they did say there's different tribes of Harfoots. I thought that was an elegant explanation. Well, why are there different races of Hobbit? Well, we'll say there's different tribes of Harfoots, and some of them look different from each other. Okay. I think what they're going to do is like when Nori, the one who talks in the trailer, when she meets Meteor Man and introduces him to the Harfoots, I think he'll ask, like, why do some of you look different? She'll go, oh, well, there's different tribes of Harfoots. I'm a forest Harfoot. That black guy over there, he's a hill country Harfoot. And those river hobbits, they sure are odd compared to the 2 of us. Because, the Stoors aren't real hobbits, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I think instead of calling them Fallowhides, they'll call them forest Harfoots in contrast with hill Harfoots, which is basically the same thing. It's just too many proper names would confuse an audience. I'm fine with that, as long as it's structurally the same thing. And the idea remains, anyway, that the hobbits weren't really one group. They were like a merger of 3 other groups. Much as the modern English were when the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes from Jutland merged in England, and then the Normans came. They're a mixture of different settled groups that were interrelated. So the way they treated it, they refer to her as a Harfoot, along with the other ones. So I think they'll just say, well, I'm a forest Harfoot. That's why I'm tall and kind of light-skinned. Same thing. Not worth making a video over. Point 5, also not worth making a video over because it's obvious. They reiterated that yes, Galadriel is a warrior in her backstory from the books in earlier time periods. Some people were freaking out about this, and I really think it was a knee-jerk reaction from people who only know the movies, where she's a queen, but thousands of years ago in her youth, in the Silmarillion and the other backstory stuff, yeah, it mentions she was a warrior. That Tolkien himself giving quotes, well, she was kind of a Amazon in temperament, braided her hair for war, was feared as a fighter, was also a commander, wanted to ally with the dwarves of Khazad-dûm because she thought they'd be good military allies, all this other stuff. So it's not worth reiterating that the new showrunners said that, because they basically just repeated what the fan sites were already saying, that the people complain, oh, Warrior Galadriel. Book fan sites were defending that of what? Yeah, in the prequel books you haven't read, that's how they describe Galadriel. All the histories of Middle-earth stuff. So within a day, they had all of these citations on the OneRing.net pointing out, here's half a dozen points where Tolkien says Galadriel was actually like that. This interview, which came out like 5 days later, basically repeated all of the same points. I don't know if they came up with them. They probably must have come up with them independently because they already were working on it for a year. But yeah, they repeated what we said, of what OneRing.net said. Yeah, there's all these quotes from Tolkien saying that's what she was like at the time of the First Age. So people reacting, yes, anytime you put a female character who's a protagonist like that on screen in an adaptation, there's the danger that they'll fall into this bland stereotype of strong female character, badass warrior princess, which is not characterization. I mean, I was afraid they'd do that with Eowyn until I saw the movie, and they generally got it right. But that could be like a comic book adaptation where you're just having her be this stereotype of a kick-ass female fighter, and she has no characterization. She's a walking stereotype. I've seen that happen in comic book movies. I've seen that happen in a lot of things that are adaptations. So I don't want to delegitimize that is always a concern in any medium. Even for characters who, like in comics, well, this woman is a warrior, but she's so much more than that in the process of adapting it to live action. So on paper, just the bits we've seen so far, there's nothing to convince us that they're being heavy-handed about it. If they are heavy-handed about it, I will be the first complaining that you're getting the tone of this wrong. That you're resorting to stereotypes, but in general, that she's a warrior, that she's leading armies, hunting remnant orcs in the northern wastes, that actually made a lot of sense. I don't have a problem with that. The OneRing.net doesn't have a problem with that. It's a non-issue. But I'm happy that they were sensible enough to cite all of these quotes in their first major interview to spell it out for people who haven't been paying attention. Yeah, this is what Tolkien said she was like when she was younger. OneRing.net agreed that's a non-issue for everyone. Point 6, a bit related to that, on the characterization for Galadriel, Gil-galad, and Elrond. They present that the elves of Lindon, the high elves that survived the destruction at the end of the First Age, what drives a lot of their characterization is that they're all traumatized in different ways. And I've actually seen some people complaining about this in the comments, but it really made sense when you think about they lived through an apocalyptic war that destroyed all of their kingdoms. By destroyed, I mean they fell into the ocean because of a magical explosion and earthquakes. They barely survived. Everyone lost family. They nearly got completely wiped out. And this heavily affects them in different ways. That Galadriel, the way they described it in the interview, is that she's driven to keep hunting the remnants of Morgoth's army in the northern wastes, like trolls and orcs hiding in caves. But she's like, well, if we leave them alone in a couple hundred years, they might trouble us again someday because we live forever. And they said she's driven by the fact that her brothers died in the wars against Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, in the First Age, that like her brother Finrod, her younger brothers, she lost brothers in the war. And they barely survived. And her thing is, the death of her brothers is driving her to keep hunting the monsters that took them, that killed them. Whereas, in contrast, Gil-galad, he wants to focus on keeping everyone alive. Don't lose more people going on hunting expeditions on a handful of orcs hiding in a cave in the frozen tundra that they're not going to affect anything again. We need to focus on rebuilding and securing what we already have, because we're staring extinction in the face. We nearly got wiped out. We need to rebuild. I'm reading into this, but it was an interesting question that someone brought up in one of the comments sections on my things. Wow, this makes Gil-galad seem like I'm worried they're going to present him as a bad king, that he disagrees with Galadriel leading hunting expeditions, and well, we can't lose any more people. We can't lose any more elves doing this. It's not really worth it. They won't threaten us again. The comparison I came up with is, think of a post-apocalyptic show, like a zombie show, like The Walking Dead, and you have a survivor community, and there's a disagreement between reasonable, intelligent people, neither of which is wrong. All of them are traumatized, though. There's a disagreement between those saying, we need to keep doing hunting expeditions to cull the zombie herds to make sure they don't become a rise to the level that they're a major threat again, versus the other people saying, we have finite resources, we can't suffer the attrition of sending people on hunts, and randomly you're going to lose a few people every time you go on a hunt just due to bad luck. We need to husband and shepherd our resources on what we have here. That you have finite resources. Let's focus it on rebuilding. In terms of resources, man hours, limited number of people, we should be rebuilding our infrastructure, not hunting down the monsters. And neither side is wrong. I hope that's the way they're playing that it's a genuine disagreement of, well, what is the best course? We nearly got wiped out, but I could see some people reading into that of, oh, their conception of Galadriel right after the end of the first stage is she's driven by the deaths of her brothers and deeply traumatized by it. Well, her brothers did die in a big war in the source material. That happened. And yeah, she would be driven by that. Wouldn't that affect someone? Tolkien never spelled it out that way, but I consider that a reasonable extrapolation. Once again, they might be heavy-handed with it, but on paper, this isn't bad, as an outline. Yeah, okay, she would be like that. As I keep saying, the dialogue in this show might be terrible. But in principle, I'm glass half full. I'm the defense attorney going, okay, that's not an inherently bad idea. Let's judge it one step at a time. I'm not shilling for this, just, okay, that makes sense. And I mean, the other thing is Gil-galad doesn't seem like totally incompetent. The way they make it sound is he wants to focus on rebuilding, and he is making some other smart actions, like sending Elrond to Khazad-dûm to rebuild their alliance with the dwarves. That's a good plan. He's like, I don't want to keep sending and losing people on hunts for random orcs. We're losing people in ambushes. We should be rebuilding our economy, our infrastructure, rebuilding our alliances and trade with the dwarves, building our kingdom stronger. That's also a good way to rule. So I think that's the contrast to going for. I don't think they're trying to make Gil-galad look bad. We'll have to do. That's a major issue. The thing you have to remember is Tolkien he survived the First World War. He lived through all that madness. And think of just how affected the Lost Generation was. I mean, even compared to losses in World War II, no one had seen death on this scale before. It was unprecedented, the First World War. And in the 1920s, how many people in Britain and in other places really didn't want there to be another war? And just thought that all of them were traumatized. Every family either lost a family member or at least knew someone who died. The trauma that was, and some of them would become bitter about it, some of them, and become war hawks. Some of them would, on the other hand, most of them would be, we have to focus on rebuilding, there can't be another war, we can't lose any more people, it'd be too devastating. Seeing that parallel to that, if I can see, that seeing the destruction of the War of Wrath and the final battle against Morgoth, that they changed their calendar. It was so devastating. They said this is the end of the first age, beginning of the second age. So much has been lost. That, I can see them playing it up, that these are traumatized, that they've lost so much. All the old elven kingdoms are destroyed. They're trying to rebuild in the Blue Mountains at Lindon, which is like the tiny part of Beleriand that still survives west of the Blue Mountains that wasn't swallowed by the ocean in the destruction. Of why they would be like that. And, this is in Tolkien's original outline, basically, that the elves were seduced by Sauron in his guise as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, that he said, I'll teach you how to make magic rings, and you can rebuild everything you've lost. You can heal the world. You can make it as good as Valinor again. You can rebuild all the kingdoms you've lost with this power to do good. And they're so traumatized that, not unreasonable, not out of greed, they get seduced by this because they've lost so much and they want to rebuild. Anyone who's ever lost anyone, you can see that it's tragic, but that's in the outline, that they were seduced by his arguments of, you can rebuild everything you lost. The seduction of that immortality thing. So that's a major theme in the book, the seduction of power, and it's not even for a bad thing. I take it out of a sense to do good. I can see that of their general plan of these are traumatized people, that explicitly Galadriel is traumatized by the deaths of her brothers in the war against the first Dark Lord. Well, they did die in the war. Why wouldn't she be traumatized? That Gil-galad is hesitant to think there'll be another war, but wants to rebuild their alliances, rebuild their economy. I can see that working out. I can see that. Also, they said we have a character arc for Elrond that, in contrast, he's younger than either of them, and he was really born late in the First Age. And Galadriel is his future mother-in-law. He marries Galadriel's daughter eventually. And as it's this much younger elf, he's very optimistic. And they said we wanted a character arc for the Elrond we see in the Lord of the Rings trilogy and Fellowship. I mean, he spells out, I have lost faith in men and other races, because, and not without reason, that I was there when it's like the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, like a parallel, that I begged Isildur to destroy evil, to destroy the power of the ring, and he refused. I saw the fall of man, and the strength of men's moral character failed. And people going, oh, why didn't he attack him? Because he's holding the one ring. He could kill Elrond with a flick of his hand. Because he has the ring. Most he can hope to do is convince him to destroy it himself, and he didn't. I think they conveyed that pretty well, that Elrond is upset with the failure and flaws in humanity, not without reason. But he's jaded. And they said, we want to, in contrast, show he's younger, he's optimistic, and that he will reach that point after surviving all of these wars in the Second Age, that it's the last alliance of elves and men, because it breaks up after that. That reaching the point where Isildur doesn't destroy the ring leaves him very cynical. And they describe in the interview the Third Age after Sauron's defeat is kind of post-apocalyptic in a way. And they're right, that there's all these ruined kingdoms that were never rebuilt. There's just wastelands of grass and stone ruins. But like when the Fellowship is traveling through just moors and waste and overgrown fields, and you go, oh, this used to be the elf kingdom of Eregion, it's abandoned now. Because war passed over it, and there's just empty places where people didn't resettle. I mean, they could. I mean, there's good farmland and stuff. It's not like it's burned away to nothing, but there used to be a lot more. And when you look at a map of Middle-earth and realized how many places were wiped out and gutted through war, just what happened. So Elrond lived through all of that, and you'll see him in contrast, younger and trying to build alliances with the dwarves and optimistic. And they said, well, we planned that out, that he'll, particularly with Isildur's, I wouldn't say betrayal, but his failure to destroy the ring will turn him into the Elrond who's sterner and less trusting that we see by the trilogy. That entirely makes sense. So of what little we can think of these characters, I mean, in terms of their personality, there's only like 3, maybe 4 established characters if you include Sauron. Most of the characters in this are going to be invented, so we have to focus on Galadriel, Elrond, and Gil-galad, because it's really all we can talk about. But in broad strokes, yeah, that's pretty much what I would do. That's fine. That doesn't contradict the source material, which is, an outline and an appendix. I will judge it when I see it if they execute it well, but in terms of the general point that everyone is traumatized by the end of the First Age and all the losses they took, and this drives their decisions, yeah, that makes sense to me. That entirely fits to me. Point 7 is about language. This is the last point here, and it's silly that the interviewer who did this with the showrunners for Vanity Fair, she did a follow-up live stream with the One Ring Death the following Tuesday, and I asked a question in the live chat, and they read it off, but they misunderstood my question, so that's my fault, because it turns out you were supposed to submit questions ahead of time in the forum. I hadn't noticed, so I just desperately asked my question really fast in a chat. I wasn't supposed to do that, so I can't really blame them that they didn't get it, because it was just flying by really fast. In the interview, the third and last Vanity Fair article, they mentioned, oh yeah, we devoted some attention that each group of characters should have their own accent that identifies them. Like the high elves, like Galadriel and Gil-galad and Elrond, in Lindon are very refined aristocrats, so they speak with crisp British accents. I think that's how you describe how they talk in the movies, but yeah, the elves are, those elves at least, are really refined aristocrats, and also elves are master linguists, that they would speak proper received pronunciation British very formally. I don't think they're going to. I'd have to hear it if it's too over the top, but generally they talk in refined English, received pronunciation, as a baseline for they're intelligent, they're linguists, they're smart. And in contrast to that, the proto-hobbits, the Harfoots, they have, well, they're rustic, they're these migrating, people of the land, farmers when they're not migrating. They said, well, to show that they're kind of rustic and agrarian, we gave them an Irish lilt. That all of them talk in this sort of folksy Irish lilt. And to be honest, this isn't that different from what the Lord of the Rings trilogy did. They had similar rationales behind every accent. So when I asked this in the OneRing.net live chat, they thought I was asking, does every accent group remain consistent? That isn't what I meant. And they said, well, yeah, they're all consistent. Beyond accent group this is what point 7 really is. Language barriers. I asked, what happens when there's a language barrier? Because the interviewer said they showed me the first 3 episodes. And it might just not have come up, or they couldn't talk about it. She said, there's certain things I can't talk about. Fair, and I understood. That's fine. The issue is, what we hear as English in Lord of the Rings movies is called the common speech. And the common speech doesn't exist yet in the Second Age, physically. And these people wouldn't be speaking it anyway, that the elves among themselves in Lindon are speaking High Elvish. They're speaking Quenya. And I understand it would be translated into English for our benefit, for the benefit of the viewer. When we see them talking to each other, they're talking, like even in the movies, when you see like Elrond talking to Arwen when no one else is around, presumably they're speaking in Elvish and it's just translated for our benefit. And I'm fine with that, it's TV, that's the thing in a lot of sci-fi fantasy things. So they're presumably speaking High Elvish when we see the elves in Lindon. And we'll see Elrond go to Khazad-dûm. And the thing is, Tolkien never really developed Dwarvish that much, Khuzdul. But there is a constructed Khuzdul which they use for the Lord of the Rings films. Presumably they'll do that again. Also, presumably, the dwarves know how to speak Elvish. And when you'll hear like a line or two in Dwarvish, but they're like, yeah, we know how to speak Elvish. Because, they're the people we trade with. They functionally would know Quenya or Sindarin, which is regular Elvish. So, okay, Elrond goes to Khazad-dûm. Understand that they're not speaking the same language Frodo will 3,000 years from now. If Elrond's in Khazad-dûm talking to Durin IV, presumably they're all talking in Quenya, in High Elvish. Either that, or they'll say Elrond knows Khuzdul well enough, and then they'll present it translated. That makes it, but that on its own, that storyline makes sense. As for the Harfoots, they're not in contact with the elves. So long as the storylines remain separate, this isn't an issue. But think about it, that the Harfoots, far off in the east, they do not speak High Elvish. They're speaking the Proto-Hobbit language. But for the benefit of the viewer, it will universally be presented as English. But if ever one of the Proto-Hobbits was on screen with Galadriel, there would be a language barrier. They won't, because they're not in contact with each other. But okay, they're speaking whatever language they are, and we are hearing it as English with a rustic Irish lilt to show, how they're not very refined, they're just living off the land, they're this migrating group of people looking for a homeland, while the elves talk like British accent to show they're aristocrats. That's fine. The other points, though, the other storylines, the thing in the south where they said the Sylvan elves, who are not the same as the High Elves, they're the Wood Elves. They're a lower kind. That the sundering of the elves, where you got the High Elves at the top, the Wood Elves at the bottom, and in the gray area in between them, you have the Gray Elves, because they're not quite High Elves, they're not quite Wood Elves. The Noldor, the Sindar, and the Sylvan elves. There's more of the groups than that, but that's basically it. But they said there's this Sylvan elf, Arondir, who lives near and in contact with this human village in they say the Southlands, which I assume is Harad, possibly Lond, Dare, and Enedwaith before other people migrated there, but let's assume Harad. presumably, they're going to handle that by having all the humans speaking in English, even though we understand the humans are speaking some sort of Haradrim Southron language that Tolkien never developed, so we're hearing it as English. They're not speaking High Elvish, nor are they speaking Proto-Hobbit. But whatever they're speaking becomes the baseline, is what I'm saying. And we hear it as English. And then we just hear Arondir speaking in Sindarin, presumably, or maybe we didn't really develop a Sylvan language, but we'll hear him speaking Sindarin, presumably. And that also makes sense, that so long as they don't interact with Galadriel, it's like a separate show. She speaks, the human woman speaks English, Bronwyn, I think her name was. Bronwyn speaks English, he speaks constructed Sindarin, constructed Elvish. That makes sense. The point where this becomes an issue is, we know from they showed us photos of this, Galadriel will get in a shipwreck and get picked up and rescued by a ship from Numenor. And she will continue on to Numenor seeking allies in her fight against the rising power of Sauron. So we know that's happening. Here, we would run into a language barrier. This is a point where two language zones intersect. You expect the dwarves know how to speak Elvish because they've been around for hundreds of years. I mean, well, they don't live forever. They live to be, 250? But they would teach their children, okay, this is how to speak Elvish. They're one of the major powers in the world. Numenor has been isolated for a really long time. That after the First Age ended, the ancestors of... These are Aragorn's ancestors thousands of years ago. Aragorn and the people of Gondor and Arnor are the Dunedain, who are descendants of the Edain, who are the good humans who helped the elves in the wars against Morgoth. As a reward, at the end of the First Age, the powers raised up this, led them to this island, this paradise island, which is the Atlantis of Middle-earth, Numenor, in the middle of the ocean. It's not part of any continent. And they did some basic training with them of, okay, this is how mining works, this is how shipbuilding works, here's to get your civilization started. Then the elves left to go to the western continent, so there was like a 2,000-year stretch, a 1,000-year stretch where Numenor was isolated and not in contact with anyone, because their numbers were so low. But, centuries pass, eventually their numbers get really big and they start going exploring again. So they've been out of contact for a while. So the issue is, would there be like a language barrier when we've been hearing Galadriel speaking English all this time, and when she has scenes with the Numenorians, they don't know High Elvish anymore? You think about it, that there would logically, and she's a good linguist, so I think she'd pick up on what they're speaking pretty quickly, that common speech is descended from the language of Numenor, the language of the Gondorians, which was Adunaic. That I'm not going to bother making a chart now. I'm going to do this when it comes up in a trailer. The original language of the forefathers of Numenor was called Taliska, which is what they spoke in the First Age. In the Second Age, Taliska turned into Adunaic, the language of Numenor. Then, when the Numenorians colonized, then enslaved, the coastal peoples, who were like Celtic peoples in the north and Haradrim, who were black in the south, they used their Adunaic language, but it's sort of creolized with whatever the local languages are. So they said around where Gondor is, Adunaic mixed with all these Celtic local languages, the people they were basically enslaving. But later, when the good Numenorians escaped its destruction and settled in Gondor, because they were educated, they enriched it with some words from Elvish. So it's a bit of influence on Adunaic from Celtic, other languages, then mixed with Elvish, and it turned into modern common speech. Think about how English is a mishmash of Anglo-Saxons as Germanic language mixed with this Celtic Welsh substratum in Britain, and then mixed with Latin and French through various other waves of movement and stuff. So Adunaic kind of turned into common speech, but it's a whole thing. The point is, Galadriel knew how to speak Taliska. She knew how to speak the language of the forefathers of Numenor. She knew how to speak it 2,000 years ago. that fast forward to the war against Sauron, where they haven't been in contact with Numenor for 1,000 years. Like, for her, it's, just for an elf, the blink of an eye. For them, it's like, I think he said that hearing an elf talk is like, imagine if aliens came down and tried to interact with us, and then they came back, what for them wasn't a very long time, and they came back speaking flawless classical Latin. And they said, what, you don't speak classical Latin anymore? And they need to update it for what we're speaking now, or learned flawless Anglo-Saxon as spoken in the year 1000, came back 1,000 years later and went, what, you mean your languages change over time? That wasn't that long. It's only 1,000 years. So I'm wondering if there's going to be like a language barrier when she meets the Numenorians, that she spoke their language in the form it existed in 2,000 years ago. But then again, she's very intelligent. She would pick up on it very quickly. Just when you see that those points in the trailer of her meeting men from Numenor picking her up in her shipwreck, would there be like a language barrier? I realize this is a very nerdy linguistic question, but Tolkien's world was built for linguistic analysis. That's what he made a fantasy world, because he was a linguist who wanted to discuss, like, what are they doing? So I don't think these storylines will overlap too much, so it's not really a problem. That we will hear the proto-hobbits and the high elves and the humans in the Southlands all speaking English when they're actually speaking different languages. But so long as they don't overlap, it's not really a problem. I don't think they'll overlap. But Galadriel, even Elrond going to the dwarves would know Elvish well enough. We'll just hear Elvish as English. I think that's what's going on. So these were I do not have time to do this as a real video. I'm doing this as an audio-only podcast, unedited. Just for the hardcore few who are willing to listen to it and give you a heads up, check out that interview. Whenever another trailer comes out in a couple of months, I don't think we're going to get one this month, I will make shorter and more detailed. It takes more time and effort to make a concise 15-minute video with slides and things. This is just an open rant of points that were brought up by the showrunners' third and final interview thing with Vanity Fair. Nothing that really upset me, other than, okay, they're streamlining a thing or two in there, like with the dwarves and stuff. Again, I am not anticipating this show. I'm not eagerly waiting. That they're not going to get it as good as Peter Jackson got the first trilogy. I don't expect them to. There isn't enough source material to do it right. Even if they had the Silmarillion, which has a lot more source material, it's not as well suited to movie or television form. I would like to watch a show about Turin and the fall of Nargothrond, but it's not really the same. That don't walk into this thinking it's going to be the same thing again. But it could be pleasant like a video game. But it's so weird how so many people that's how you get blind hype, by not giving them information, so people just project all their hopes onto it. That for what, a year, 2 years they've been working on this? Giving us no information. It was so weird the night the teaser came out. Just the utter hype and expectations people had going into it. I'm trying to tell them, nothing will match how much you built this up. Particularly because it's got less source material than, the Game of Thrones prequel actually is a set of prequel novellas which I have read, and which I wanted to see adapted. Even then, it isn't as much source material. It's a different story. I think it's really good. This is just an outline, even compared to that. And we have less reason to think it'll be really good. And I think the tragic thing about this show is it might turn out to be halfway decent, but people will still be against it for not holding up to what they assume the quality level of anything related to Lord of the Rings should be, when it's like a side project. And it's weird that Bezos, who isn't the craziest leader, in terms of the things he wanted for the show, well, it has to be character growth. He put it decent compared to HBO's run by idiots. But he openly said, I want Amazon Prime to have its own Game of Thrones. He is comparing this to being, this will be our Game of Thrones, and it isn't as good of a story, the Second Age. Even if you had a good adaptation of the A Song of Ice and Fire novels for Game of Thrones, like Season 1, which was a good adaptation of the first book, we only have an outline in the Lord of the Rings appendix. It won't be that good. I don't expect it to be. I expect it to be mildly diverting. That you're not seeing Cate Blanchett's Galadriel in this. I don't expect to. I expect it to be kind of interesting as just a side thing, but and I feel bad seeing how hyped up like the OneRing.net is and everyone else. I am interested in this as an intellectual curiosity. I don't see how this could be like the second coming of Star Wars or something. House of the Dragon, I do think, can be a very well told story that brings back the magic of what when they were faithful to the world of George R. R. Martin. Again, because I've read the prequel novellas it's based on. But I don't know with this, but cautiously, I'm actually cautiously optimistic now, but I'm still not, the blind faith because I've been burned before. I still have questions about their production stuff. If nothing else, they've shown us so little, I have no reason to automatically assume it'll be good. Even if these were experienced showrunners, even if Jackson was doing this again, I wouldn't have blind faith that he got it right. Because, it's hard to adapt when it's just an outline. So thank you for listening to this podcast. Just slapped it together here just to cover these 7 major points. It's a rant. Again, it's a catch-up because I'm already 2 weeks late. So I figured this is for the handful of people who are willing to sit down and listen to this, who are really invested. And the casual people, it takes longer to make shorter videos, to think out how to say something concisely. When the next trailer comes out, I'm going to make like a 10 to 15 minute video with infographic slides that is more succinct and more coherently presented. I'll think it out before I present it, of, okay, these are story elements we can see in this new trailer. This is just for anyone who's still interested in this. I assume if you're still interested, you're also willing to listen to me talk for an hour. So I just put all this out as one big thing so I can jump onto some other projects because I'm behind schedule. I will be covering the Lord of the Rings series when it comes out. I am not the biggest expert out there. There are Tolkien scholars as a career. I am not one of them. I have read the Silmarillion, and I read the Lord of the Rings trilogy plus appendices very thoroughly. I read Karen Wynne Fonstad's Atlas of Middle-earth very thoroughly. Read all of them in the late 90s very thoroughly, but this was my religion. Going into the first Lord of the Rings trilogy, I read everything. Back when the trilogy was at its height, I read the Silmarillion before the movie trilogy came out. So I said before I was on the fence about whether I should cover this, and I realized I know enough off the top of my head that I can talk in a video for 10 minutes. I'm not a hardcore Lord of the Rings channel that will be citing specific lines in the Histories of Middle-earth series, backing things up. I don't have the capacity to do that, but then again, short videos wouldn't need that. So this is a little bit more out of my element, that there is so many hardcore experts on this, and I defer to their expertise. But I can give some thoughts off the top of my head, which are reasonably well informed, and I can spend 10 minutes looking it up in the Tolkien wikis that I know of to refresh my memory, because some of this I read 10 to 20 years ago. I just read it, it was one of my favorite books at the time. It was 20 years ago. So, like, I read it 20 years ago, but I can list off all of the high elves in the First Age off the top of my head, the Sons of Fëanor, House Finarfin, House Fingolfin, and I can draw the family trees, because I read it, and I was really reading it solid for like a year. But it's been a while. I'll reread the appendices are only 150 pages, so I'm going to reread those before the series starts, but you don't really need to know that much for something that has such little source material. Of, well, what was the Second Age like compared to the First Age and the Third Age? It's a very thin set of source material for what actually happened. But I'll go over it as best I can. Just, again, I realized I can't, report on the Wheel of Time or The Witcher. I know nothing about them as book series, versus, I'm decently familiar with the source material on this. I might as well devote some time to covering it. I will not be devoting as much attention to it as House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones projects. But I'm reasonably well informed, so if you guys feel like listening, I'll give my opinion. And if someone from the Tolkien community points out, hey, you got this all wrong, because in the Histories of Middle-earth Volume 5, it actually says this other thing that contradicts your opinion, I will acknowledge my error. that I am not as well read as I could be on this. I've read enough. I've read Silmarillion, I've read other stuff. So that's what we're going to be covering on this, and that was not a good teaser trailer. Just objectively, the story could be great. I mean, it said when they actually put out a description explanation of the teaser trailer, it actually was interesting. The teaser was not good in terms of. I realize it's for a Super Bowl crowd. It's a Super Bowl teaser for a general audience, not for the fantasy fans. But the One Ring.net was saying this just last week in their live chat. I just really stuck with me that the host of the live chat said, the person hosting it said, they need to win over the book crowd, and they probably will at some point in the future, but so far they haven't. That we need to see a trailer or behind-the-scenes special that acknowledges we are paying attention to the lore, to the source material. And I look forward to it. This is very early. It's months from now. But we've seen barely anything about this, and I'm making this on March 2nd. The show is coming out on September 2nd, which is exactly 6 months from now. Think of how much that the biggest, most expensive TV show in history, I mean, objectively, spent $500 million on it, and we're 6 months out, and we have one incomprehensible teaser trailer and a brief set of interviews in Vanity Fair without much specific information, and we know nothing about the cast. Well, I mean, we know who the cast is, but we haven't seen them in specials talking about their characters. They probably will. I mean, we've seen. They just. I'll end on this note. They just said that they're going to have specials packaged with every episode as it streams on Amazon Prime, the way they did with The Expanse. What do they call those? The X-ray features or something? But they were saying how we will have all sorts of behind-the-scenes things packaged with every episode the week it streams. Stuff you'd normally in prior years you'd have in the DVD release. That no, we're going to have like behind-the-scenes cast things. It's going to be all this background stuff. Sort of like what Game of Thrones did, where they put out like YouTube clips every week in season 1. But they said they are planning on doing that. There will be behind-the-scenes stuff with the bonus features. They just said they're going to do that. And we will have fun picking those apart when they come. But so far, it's like everyone got so worked up about this teaser trailer, they thought there'd be more to debate in it. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like a full Lord of the Rings trailer, like the Two Towers trailer, the full trailer, gave people a lot to talk about and analyze. This teaser really didn't. It was only a minute long. There was barely any dialogue in it. You didn't really see that much of the world. Hopefully they'll start putting out more promo materials, because right now we're kind of in a news dead zone, not just for this, but for a lot of other projects. So I hope they start up pretty soon. And when they do, you will hear back from me. I'm not actively planning to make more Lord of the Rings videos right now. These issues will come up again, because they've said they're part of the story, like Galadriel is traumatized by her brothers dying and it drives her to keep fighting. That will logically keep coming up again, so when it comes up again in the next set of interviews or full trailer, I will start from scratch and just make a new analysis with that. I'm so far behind on Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon news, on the streaming wars news for their platforms, that I'm not actively planning to do anything. There's nothing in the works, but when there is something in the news to react to, if you hear something Lord of the Rings in the news, something big, come here, I will be reacting to it, like a new major interview or a new set of promos. That when it happens, you'll know. You won't be a surprise. Oh, I wonder if the Dragon Demands is making something. If there's something making the rounds in the news, I will report on it. So please like and subscribe and stick around for that, and I have to get back to all my other projects.